Good afternoon, everyone. My name is TJ Muehlman. I'm founder and chief organizer person at Standard Co. And we're here with another edition of our series, Data in the Wild, where we talk about data. We talk about wild things. We talk about data in the wild. It's pretty far out. Today, we're going to talk about data visualizations. Why sometimes the simpler data visualizations, the preferred data visualization. One of my chief concerns with data visualizations is that they've become more and more complex as they've become more and more beautiful. My goal with data visualizations is always to communicate a simple concept. Maybe it's to show where you see a spike in traffic, or maybe you want to check the scores of something. Using data visualizations is designed to communicate something very quickly and very efficiently. And I believe that oftentimes now data visualizations get in the way of that. So what we're going to do today is we're going to actually show you a real world scenario. It's a customer of ours in Haiti, where they're actually tracking how what's called traditional birth attendants in Haiti. These are basically like a doula or a midwife, and they help people help women give birth. And there's like a scoring system that shows how that went. So we have a bunch of data that they use, standard data, our platform, to collect, and we want to show how these traditional birth attendants are actually doing. So let's go over to standard data first, and we'll talk a little bit there. Okay, so standard data is our data platform. It's a data warehousing tool that's designed for humanitarian logistics. It's designed for to be used in low and middle income countries where internet isn't as reliable. And so in this particular case, I've taken real actual data and I've taken out the real people's names and replaced it with my favorite comic book as a child, Archie's. This is a real concept here, though. They're actually going into these homes as they're observing childbirths and assessing a score, a very simple 1 to 4 score on how the traditional birth attendant did in helping the mother give birth. And so you see the names here: Midge, Jughead, Betty, Miss Grundy, who was my favorite when I read the Archie comic books. These are obviously in place of real people. But the scores are actual real scores, and they're designed to kind of show how the people did. And you have over here introduction date. So all this data was already captured with our data tools, cleaned, normalized, and turned into what you see here. And so that's what we do at Standard Data is we kind of engineer data to get it to a place where we can actually present it and help answer questions that people might have. So now we're going to hop over to Metabase, which is our data visualization tool, and show you how we're actually using this data to answer some questions. Okay, now we're in Metabase, and the data that you just saw in standard data, you'll see here reflected in Metabase because we have a native connection with Metabase. So any data that flows into our data platform is automatically reflected in Metabase in real time. And so again, we have the date, we have the name, we have the score. Really simple data set here. And all I want to do is I want to show a trend line. I want to show this data on a line graph. So let me show you what happens in Metabase. So if I do this, I just picked, I'd already configured this. So the name is down here and the score is on the y-axis. Well, Metabase does this peculiar thing where it actually takes the unaggregated names and it aggregates it for you. And so you see this little warning sign here. It says name is an unaggregated field. I don't want it to do that. I actually want it to show each instance where Archie, each date he went. And for some reason, it's not showing all those. It automatically aggregates this. And I actually haven't figured out easily how to disaggregate that. Or I have a couple of solutions, which we're going to get to here in a moment. But this doesn't actually show what I want to show. I want to show a time series. So there's a couple of options here. We can continue down the path of using the data visualization like this, or we can do something a little simpler that actually might be more useful. So I'm going to show you some of the options that I've come up with and going to walk through how we ended up solving this problem. Okay, solution A. What I ended up doing is I used the MySQL concat function to take the date and concatenate it with the name to create here the name and the date of the visit by the traditional birth attendant and their score. So now instead of having this as 2 columns, it's now 1 column. And if I visualize this, voila, I have what I'm ultimately trying to get to. I show the date, the name, and so Archie isn't in here just once as an aggregated column. He's now in here multiple times at each individual visit. So this is one way of representing the data, right? So you can see here that most people have twos. There's a three here. There's a one. This is one way to represent the data. It's a really simple chart, not that complex, but it leaves a little bit to be desired in terms of showing where there are outliers or how people actually performed against the average. So let me show you another option. Let me show you this also. You can also use a scatter plot. The scatter plot might be a little bit more useful, but you run into sort of real estate issues in terms of, some data visualizations work really well in sort of thin or narrow bands like a line graph. Scatter plot kind of needs more real estate on the screen. So if you're dealing with a visualization or a dashboard that has limited space, a scatter plot's not going to be a good option. So let me pull over another option, which actually ended up being what we chose with the client, and I'll walk you through that. Okay, so let me walk you through what we ended up doing. And I'm going to kind of live code some of this or copy and paste some of this to show you kind of how we progressed through solving this problem. So I have a very simple SQL command here, and I'm going to choose the visualization of table, which in the grand scheme of things, table is kind of boring, right? When you could have a line chart or a scatter plot, you might opt for something prettier. But in this case, I think a line chart works better. And let me show you why. Or I'm sorry, a table works better. So let me walk you through table. And you've got your different columns here. So the date and the name of what they call Matrone and the score. So I can actually pick the score. And you'll notice one thing I did over here is the score, for some reason, is a category type. In our data system, I uploaded this and it was a string as opposed to an integer. And so this is actually kind of a good demonstration of how to fix that problem in Metabase as opposed to rebuilding everything. So I'm casting this as an unsigned integer. I'm turning it from a string into a number. And if I remove that, you'll see what happens here. So if I just leave it as score, if I don't try to change the column. So you look over here, it doesn't really look that different, does it? But you'll notice my options change because it's stored as a string. So if I go back, cast a score, oh, I'm sorry, whoops. So adding this basically conversion to an integer, again, doesn't really look that different over here, but your options are way different over here. So the little thing that I love, it's buried in the table visualization type, is this mini bar. So it actually looks at it compares it to the other scores in real time. And so like a 4 is the maximum score, so it's fully filled. A 1 is the lowest score, so it's the shortest. So visually, you're seeing how people kind of stack up. And you can see that a score of 2 is right in the middle, and a score of 3 is kind of high on the higher end. It's a very simple visual cue, but there's other things we can do, and I'm going to walk you through those right now. So I'm going to add a couple more things. So I added two things. One is I'm adding an average of the entire data set. So what this is going to do is it's going to kind of take all the entries for this particular data set and run an average. And it's going to add that as a column. It's basically a subquery. Now, I'll warn you, this works really well on a data set of tens or hundreds or even thousands. But if you have a data set of tens of thousands or millions, this query is extremely expensive, and it's something you're going to want to do out of band or do it, calculate it through a nightly script or something like that. But for the purposes of this demo, it's totally fine. And then the next thing I do is I'm comparing the score of the individual row to the average to basically say, is this person above or below average? Okay, so let me go ahead and run this query. Hopefully it runs. Yes, it's always scary to run a query that you haven't run before. So I have here, so let me walk you through what I've done. I've got an individual row. So this is the date that Mr. Weatherby went to help deliver a baby. And the vision of Mr. Weatherby delivering a baby haunts me, but whatever. He had a score of 2. The average in this data set is 2.33, so he is below average. He is not above average. This is super helpful, again, for a client to kind of quickly look at an individual row, know how they scored, and how they compare to the rest of the data set. You can take this one step further and add a conditional, right? So this is kind of neat. So you can basically say above average, okay? If it's equal to yes, we're going to give it the color of green, and we're going to highlight the entire row. So this tells us that now we're scanning green, like these individual visits are scored above average. So I'm gonna add that rule. I'm gonna add another rule. I'm gonna say it's equal to no, and I'm gonna make that red because that's obviously not good. Add that rule. Oh, whoops. I want to make that the entire row. So now we have a little Christmas looking chart with red and green. So this visualization isn't quite as sexy as a really pretty line chart or a scatter plot, but I think it's actually more effective and it's more communicative in terms of what this particular client is wanting to see. They want to see all of the entries for a time series and how they performed against the rest of the crowd. So hopefully this was helpful in terms of a couple of things to think about when using Metabase or using data visualizations in general. And I'll meet you back over in the presentation. All right, so hopefully this was a useful presentation. I enjoy doing these kind of walkthroughs of Metabase. We use it every single day for some of the largest clients in the world. It's connected to our data platform, Standard Data, and it is a really useful resource, both tools. So if you found this useful, like, share, subscribe, tell your friends, tell your colleagues, tell your mom, tell her. She'd be interested. Check back next week where we'll do another video. And if you have any requests, let us know. Thanks.